Hi, I'm Justin Lokitz, and this is the Design Shift Podcast, your weekly guide to mastering the leap from creative expert to confident design leader, packed with actionable insights, proven strategies, and real-world wisdom. In this episode, I chatted with the always amazing James Song, a longtime design leader and founder, about what it takes to go from IC to leader, and why designers make such great founders. Keep listening to learn why James thinks of design as a superpower and how to forge your own path as a leader and founder. And remember to subscribe to the show and the Design Shift newsletter if you enjoyed the episode. Thanks. And here we are again, folks. And today on Design Shift, I'm super excited, as per usual, to be joined by James Song, a design leader who's spent the last 2 decades shaping how teams and products and systems all come together and work together. James isn't about beautiful interfaces only. He's a strategic force who's helped some of the world's most recognized companies like Frog and Uber and Meta and Tinder and a bunch of others rethink how design can drive meaningful change. From scaling design orgs to navigating the messy middle between business and creativity, James brings sharp insight, deep empathy, and bias for action. And I'm thrilled to speak with James and to talk about the future of design leadership, designers as founders, the role of AI, and really why design matters. Welcome, James.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin. That was a very, very generous introduction. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay, so let's just kick right into it. You have a couple degrees in computer science and a BFA in visual communications. What happened? At some point you became a designer. How did you know you wanted to be a designer, and how did that start?
It's not a long story, but it's a winding story that I think might be helpful for your listeners. I grew up in Atlanta at a time when the internet was just coming online and people were figuring out what it was. But I think the access to information was still pretty limited, or at least I was pretty siloed in what I knew about the world. And so I didn't know what design was as a career, as a role, as a something that people did, or as a or anything. And so I lived in Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta, and one of the best schools there is Georgia Tech. And so they're pretty renowned for computer science. And I was like, well, it's a public school and it's cheaper and it's right there, so I'll try to go there.
Nice.
And I was always the kid who could good with computers and draw, right? And I was like,
Okay.
what's the thing that's at the intersection of being creative and artistic, but also being really good with computers? And I was kind of like, this is funny. I was like, maybe I'll go into medical illustration because I saw that somebody had a job drawing illustrations for medical textbooks. I was like, is that a job? Can I do that? But I didn't really know. And then I saw my first Pixar film actually, and I remember the moment when I remember this is a little dated now, but it was Toy Story, and as soon as the first shot of Woody when he jumps up on the bed, I really believe that was real. That looks photoreal. And so, wandering career, I pursued 3D animation for a long time. I moved to San Francisco actually to try to work at Pixar because of that. And along the way, my parents were just like, please finish something, just do something. And so I was taking animation class that was inside of the design school here in San Francisco. And that's where I actually discovered typography and layout and composition and all these things. And I was still kind of I was learning graphic design, still poking around websites and inspecting source code and that kind of thing. And just kind of trying to marry the two. So I became the web guy, and that kind of just grew from there. But it's taken a lot of twists and turns, and now my animation experience with the whole metaverse stuff is coming back around, and I'm still vibe coding and getting my hands dirty with the engineering side of things, but I've always kind of been straddling a bunch of different worlds in my career.
Yeah, it's I've talked to now a bunch of people, and in my life, thousands of people, designers, engineers, and others, and it always seems that the people, I wouldn't say that just rise to the top, but the people that are really interesting and we end up wanting to speak with and go deeper are people who are straddling that line, right? Are strategic and are engineers, but also designers. And what it means to me is you're curious I'm looking at you and nodding, right? You're curious about how things work and how things look and how people react to them. At least that's what I've gotten from you.
I think that's exactly right. Is that I'm curious about everything. I go into these rabbit holes about how did somebody make something and
Yeah,
make it like that. And a lot of it is like how much of this was intuition and how much of this was like carefully thought through and meticulous. And it's just really, really interesting to me the way that people make things and how much of it is, instinct and how much of it is strategy and how much
yeah,
orchestration. And I think it's just really, really fascinating because I mean, I go back to this thing that Steve Jobs said that Johnny Ive refers to a lot, which is, the best way to express affection for the species is just to make something and put it out there and say, I made
yeah,
this for you, and it's like, could be a dish, it could be a cup of coffee, it could be a product that you use on your phone, it could be, experience that you lead somebody through, but that is a sign of gratitude and a way to express yourself as a person and as a team. So I always come back to that as like, that's kind of what my intent is.
I love that. I'll dig in on that a little bit. What then is the essence of design, right? What you're talking about is also making something for someone. How does that align, or is that the same as like what is design? What's the essence of design then to you?
I mean, I think, there's a definition of design that's, design is intent made real, right?
Mm,
There's two sides of that, which is what is your intent and then how do you make it real, right? And I think that for a lot of the first half of my career, I would say I was focused on the like making it real. Like, is it a website? Is it an app? Is it a experience or whatever, right? And then, the second half of my career was really focused on what is the intent? What should this be? Um, what can this be? Right. Um, and I think that for me, design is both sides of that coin, and it's shaped the way that I approach my career and the teams that I work on and the products and services that I work on. And I think that for me, design has always been a lens to like go super deep in a space and really understand what's going on with people and with users and like the opportunity. And also give yourself the space to kind of ideate within that. So you're creating the box for yourself by
yeah,
understanding the market and understanding the TAM and all that stuff. But then you're allowing yourself the freedom to like play and bounce around within that box because if you're unbounded, you're just going to bounce all over the place. I struggle with this too, where I have a million ideas, but none of them actually go anywhere because um, I'm constrained in some way, right?
right.
And so you need the constraints of what actually
Yeah.
am I trying to solve for, et cetera, who is my user. But I think of design as both sides of that in terms of like, what should this be and how should it be that way? Right? And like along the way, there's a lot of tensions that will happen between the two. But if you're thinking about design, as you would call it, capital D design, um, it really is both sides of those things in terms of you have to define the intent and then you have to define the way that you manifest that intent and work through all the pitfalls of that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. At some point, you've always been a designer, it sounds like, and a creative, curious person, and you became a leader. And for some time, and at these big organizations, Frog, which did a metric shit ton of design for everyone, and Uber and Meta and Tinder, and these are consumer products, right? Which obviously have huge reach. Um, what's one thing that you tell any designer, up and coming designer, for instance, who dreams about dreams about, oh, I would love to, be the face of this thing as a design leader who might be an IC now, working on, the nitty gritty details of something.
I would say that you have to ask yourself what's driving that design,
Mm,
right? I think that for me, I was never like, I'm going to be a leader and that's the end goal, right? I was really curious and I cared probably too much about the outcomes,
yeah.
like it was like I felt ownership over the whole thing and I did whatever I thought I needed to do to make sure the outcome was what I thought was acceptable or good for us, right? And so if somebody is aspiring to become a design leader, it's like, do you want the responsibility? Do you want the accountability? Do you want the ability to uh, make something that impacts a lot of people, which requires a large team, right? Like, what is driving that motivation for you to be a leader? Um, And let's just say it is, the motivation to impact millions and millions of people. There's a huge amount of accountability and ownership and responsibility that comes with that. So I think that when I think about my journey, it was really like I was so curious about what was going on with our users or my team or the brand or whatever it was. And I just went super deep on it, and I did my best to try to rally other people around that. And if you do that as an IC, then that's natural leadership tendencies. But it's very much about how do you bring people along, not just with hard skills and logic. I've seen some of the smartest people in the world kind of bludgeon people with their intellect and just kind of be intellectual vampires, so to speak. And they can just literally out talk anybody. And it's kind of people that doesn't make people feel good. Like, yeah, you were all moving in the same direction, but it doesn't make me feel the best about working with you. Um, and so I would say, like, if you're thinking about leadership, it really is how do you give other people the space to contribute in their own way while you are holding the entire picture in your head and you're articulating that, but also letting people put their own stamp on what that vision is.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you is a classic storyteller, right? You go back to that Pixar thing, right? Pixar is a story unfolding and being told, and you believing it real also is because you could see you sort of yourself. There's something in you, and you've got your own internal stories that are running parallel to that. And it sounds like that's a lot of what you think of as design leadership. Maybe it's just leadership in general, which is give an arc, give the big story, and then let people find their own stories in that where they can become the heroes. Is that something like that?
Yeah, and I think that it's about like setting the vision, organizing the things so that people can deliver on that vision, being incredibly specific when you need to be, and being
Yeah.
hands off when you need to be, right? If I'm a leader and somebody has aspirations to be, a leader too, I sit there with them and I say, this is what I'm dealing with. Like, this is what we need to solve for. What would you do in this situation? I literally, like,
Mm.
it's not, giving them my problem or giving them my work. It's like, this is a peek into what we have to solve for, right? Either it's an organizational challenge, a strategic challenge, it's a business challenge, whatever it is. Like, what do you think we should do? Like, I'm not precious about any of my solutions at all. I invite a lot of people into like, hey, this is what we need to solve for as a team. I can give you this very small piece of it, but I'm also going to give you the entire picture if there's a chance that you see something that I don't see, right? So
Yeah.
you can contribute whatever altitude that you want to contribute at, but if you're uncomfortable with ambiguity in some way, then here's a very discrete thing for you to go work on. But it really is just about being curious, and being able to see the entire picture of the business and not just the business, but the category and the culture and whole economics and all of
Yeah.
that stuff, and be able to piece it all together to have it make sense for a large team of people who are just trying to make it work.
Yeah. How has that changed for you over time, or how has that evolved from like your early days as a design leader, manager, perhaps of a few people to, to hundreds of people? How did that evolve over time? How did you find that sweet spot?
I think that it's some people might say that I'm still finding my sweet spot.
Yeah, me
Uh,
too.
I will say that, when I first started directly supervising people, it started off very small. I went from, call it a senior IC to like
Mhm.
the director level at an agency. And I had a team of like two, and it was pretty easy to manage those people and just say like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Can you do this piece? Can you do this piece? And then I'll do this piece. And it was kind of pretty straightforward. My first real management challenge was I started my own agency with a couple and back in the 2000s, and I was completely naive about what it would take, right? And how to build a team, how to inspire a team, how to lead a team. And so I made a ton of mistakes, and I turned off a lot of people. And because I was so in the weeds about stuff, I wasn't giving people space to contribute their own voice. And I made a ton of kind of just bad judgment errors. And the thing about leadership and management and, team orchestration is that nobody really teaches you that when you're an IC, right?
Right.
For if you're at Google or if you're at Facebook, I remember when I was at Facebook, they had a pretty comprehensive leadership training plan. And there was actually a very deliberate, I see the manager like coaching system that they had, which was really nice. Well, what a luxury to have. Most companies do not have something like that. And if you're lucky, you may take a couple classes on Maven or on, Skillshare or Upwork or wherever, but there is no real like guidance around how to be a leader and how to manage people unless you're in graduate school or something, right? And so you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And I think that the best place to do it is, or what I do with my most senior ICs who are interested in leadership is put them over their skis. Say like, hey, you're in charge of this person's career. You're in charge of this entire project. And here's 4 people that are on it. And you actually I'm not going to put you in like a management position because you're not going to, if you're in an authoritarian position where you directly supervise somebody's career, yeah, you can just be like, go do this or you're in trouble, right? But the bigger challenge, the actual challenge is, can you influence somebody to do something in a way that they don't have to do it that way, but you get them to want to do it in that way or get some outcome out of it. So
Yeah.
senior IC, in charge of a specific effort or set of people, and just say like, this is the outcome that we need from this group of people. Go make it happen just purely with influence, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have, X number of weeks to go get whatever. But I'm going to carve off that piece of it and you're in charge of that. And you have to do it without the authority piece of it.
Yeah. It sounds like my days as a product manager. I mean, it's, that's like classic leading through influence because everyone's, oh, yeah, but there you've got a team of 200 engineers. I'm like, oh, they don't work for me. They work for the product. So all I can do is sort of use the Jedi mind trick and try to get them to move in the same direction. And they don't have to. They can listen to someone else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the challenges, issues, problems. There was a really good article recently written by Rachel Kobetz, and also just a prolific design leader and an author of some really great articles. She was talking about the future of design leadership, specifically when it comes to AI, and without reading into it too much, right? AI changes the game, right? Now we have these context-aware things. Perhaps we're not using the same kinds of design patterns and other things, pushing pixels the same way as we did before. What do you think that design leaders are perhaps getting wrong today? And another way of saying that is, where might we have to go as design leaders? And maybe it's just business, strategic leaders, because it's just not working as well today, that, and at least not as well as it used to work.
I think there's a couple different ways that this could go, and like I'm gonna make some overly simplistic, probably like predictions or provocations. I think when I think about how the world is going to change for designers in AI, right? I was working at Meta in their AI research lab, and I saw all the different things like the state of the art that's coming and all the different problems that were being solved in AI research at the academic level. And, it was really eye-opening for me because it really was, this is going to touch everything. Like people talk about generative AI as like, oh my God, this is the next big thing, but that's just one of 45, 150
Right.
AI that are out there. And so I'm not sure people fully grok how widespread the AI effort is across every single discipline you can imagine. And so for designers, right, I think that access to knowledge is incredible. And I think that what we saw in the last, call it, a couple decades of the internet is that we've got information overload. So the idea of synthesis through large language models is really, really compelling, and it simplifies things. Again, it's overly simplistic. And so I think the role for designers as it shifts is you're going to be able to orchestrate a lot more things to focus on where you want to focus. So if you're an aspiring design leader, you're going to be able to focus more on the orchestration and put together a collection of foundational models, agent subset models, your own GPTs, whatever it might be, whatever constellation of agents and bots you want to put together. If you're a designer who cares about craft and you really care about the nitty-gritty of the execution, then you're going to find better ways to orchestrate connection with engineering or even prototyping, right? Prototyping more natively in native environments, and even engineers are figuring out what that means in this new world of Cursor and Windsurf and all that other stuff. And so I think there's a lot of different tributaries, and I think the designer that's listening to this should figure out what they care about most and what they value the most, because if you're going to be a design leader, you're going to have to ingest a lot more information and make sense of it all, because now you're responsible for the global macroeconomic situation and the supply chain issues, or um, technical constraints, or whatever it might be. And you're going to have to figure out the right strategy and architecture for your team. If you're somebody who cares about strategy and craft, how do you split your time to balance all of these different business factors and execution factors? And where should you be deploying an agent versus where should you be spending hands-on time? And, is it worth the inference time for some AI to generate a series of flows versus you just doing it yourself because you know how to do it, right?
Right. Right.
And so if I think about, you're going to have all of these, agents at your fingertips, where's your time best spent? And that's going to be a largely personal decision. But I think as the world converges on more and more information density, larger kind of computational power, both at the TPU level and at the brain level, and like
Yeah.
brain level, you have to decide where you want to focus and what you're most interested in. Because for me, my own personal journey, it really is about the orchestration of everything. And I've really loved that sense of ownership. And AI has given me the ability to offload the things that are less important to me so that I can focus on the orchestration of the whole, right? So I'm
Right.
coding, I'm designing, I'm building business models, that kind of thing. And for me personally, I love that 30,000 foot view, and I know enough about the 5 foot view that I can execute on it, but I also know what I'm not great at, and I can delegate that to either a human or someone else. I'm just better at that. But it's really a choice in terms of how you want to proceed in a world where the world's more complicated than ever. You're going to have to make sense of all these things you're probably not prepared for. So where do you want to focus? Because all the TVs are on. Which one do you want to pay attention to?
Yeah. That's right. That's right. It's like the old MTV, quick cuts. It's but it's multiple TVs doing those MTV quick cuts. Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about that, and I had a very similar conversation with Mario Ruiz and Elizabeth Glenwinkle, I think both of them well as well. That this is in some ways this is the first time that people, we have agency. We might not think so because of AI and companies now adopting AI, or at least saying they want to adopt AI. And, at a big company level, it doesn't mean they know what to do with it, which then it turns into, oh, this is a great opportunity for designers and product people and strategists, or whatever, also to basically take their agency and say, oh, I have agency. I can decide who I want to work with. I'm not just shoved on a team with a bunch of other people, but as an orchestrator of agents, perhaps I have some agency. Oh, I want to get deeper into the craft, like you said. Now I can also decide, oh, here's some agents that can do some research synthesis and connect and help me with some prototyping. And I can get deeper into the craft of actual design. Yeah. And I'd rather do research. Great. Go speak with people, right? And I could turn that around.
Yeah, I'll tell you a really interesting story of Frog in that, when I joined Frog, it was, it had been around for a long time. It had grown pretty big. And the founder, Herman Esslinger, famously, developed the first design language with Steve Jobs. And he moved here from Germany to do that. But he had, retired and sold the business. But he was still kind of around, and he would just pop around or whatever. He wanted to see what was going on. And Frog was in an interesting spot because we were, in the same conversation as an IDEO or any of those other kind of design thinking firms. But Frog was interesting because it got started in the craft, right?
Yeah.
Known for Hartmutt's pretty uncompromising point of view on a particular design problem, like a little D design problem, right? So the first Apple design language was called Snow White, and it was all the Apple IIs and those types of things. And you should see some of the prototypes that he's got of like the first iPad, and it's pretty remarkable. But he put a ton of time into the craft. And if you look at what Frog and IDEO and these other kind of consulting businesses are doing now, it very much is upstream, right? It's all strategy. And the design is kind of, baked in as an assumption that like you guys obviously have the best craftspeople in the world. But what we're actually paying for, the client, is the strategy, it's the design thinking, the process, it's the approach, right? And the craft is kind of tacked on, right? So I will say that like a large part of my identity is the beauty of the craft, right?
Yeah,
I don't want to sound like, I don't want to tell designers that you're going to have an AI bot that's got 100 pencils in their hands that will just draw whatever you want to draw and like craft is over, right? Because I think that that will always be there in terms of like, what do you think is good? I think that designers' sense of what is good and what is great
sure.
is going to change, as well as society's taste levels is going to change.
Yeah,
But I think it's up for us to shape what that should be. We should set the new bars before anyone else does, right?
yeah.
So I think that there is a risk of like, oh, I'm just going to delegate I used to have a manager who would call it drawing of streams, like drawing in Figma. I'm like, call it drawing. And I said, do you want to delegate that to a bot? That's a choice. Do you want
Yeah,
to delegate the design and research to a bot? That's a choice. And so what is it that you really care about? If you really care about craft, you will find a way to balance the hands-on nature of design, which is, I still identify myself as a maker, and I associate with craftspeople, and I consider myself part of that world. It's just the tools that they have are different, right? So
yeah,
to each person to decide how they want to think about craft and strategy and upstream and downstream and how they balance the two, because it's not a binary decision.
yeah. It makes total sense. Let's keep going on that craft side and making things. You recently left Tinder, where you were the VP of design, to start crafting your own projects, to making your own businesses. And we had this conversation a couple weeks ago about designer as founder. Tell me a little bit about that journey. You're now becoming a founder again. You've been a founder before, but you're becoming a founder again. And what does this first version of your founder life or your business look like?
I mean, to be very honest, it's just on getting the infrastructure set up, right? So setting up a business entity and like all of that boring stuff. But I think the reason that it's enticing to me is that, in my career, I was kind of like, other people know how to do it better than I do. So let me just learn, right? So when I was a graphic designer, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to copy Paula Scher because she obviously knows what she's doing, right? So I'm just going to do that. And then when I was at Frog, I was like, oh, I thought I knew what design was. These guys are way smarter, way better at this than me. And like, oh my God, that guy went to Stanford and then that guy went to Harvard. I must be an idiot. So like, I'm going to listen to them. Um, but I come to find out that like, everyone's people. We're all trying to make the best decisions that we can. And then I go to Uber and like we're pre-IPO and everything's going crazy. And let me learn what a hypergrowth looks like. And let me go to Meta and let me understand what a mature, tech company looks like at the cutting edge of technology. And like I'm learning all of these things. I got to a point in my career where I was kind of like, I feel like I see the problems that exist out there in the industry and the categories. And I see the way that people are approaching them. And I don't know that, you know, there's a totally new point of view out there for me to learn anymore. So I feel
Mhm.
like I've seen the best of the industry and how they approach things. Like, we had to present to Mark Zuckerberg and a bunch at the AI Research Lab. And I see how like methodical and meticulous and incredibly curious he is about everything. He's running, one of the largest and most sprawling companies in the world. And he went super deep on the technical things and really trying to understand what's going on with these neural networks. Um, and so I see the way that from a behavioral point of view, leaders and ICs and some of the best talent in the industry, like approach problem solving. And I felt like I could do that in some small way, right? I'm not aspiring to be, a billionaire or anything like that. It's just really like the love of building something, I think is really,
Yeah.
and it goes back to that Steve Jobs quote, in that I'm a big, food person and maker and music person. I love all kinds of expression. And, if you think about a show like The Bear, it really is about the craft. And that's what you love. And all the other stuff, the other 95% of it is just terrible.
Yeah, right.
It's invoicing, it's revenue models, it's not features, it's costs, it's whatever. And I really love plating a dish for somebody and putting it out there and saying like, I made this for you. I hope you enjoy it. If you don't, then we'll try to learn from that and make it better. And I really wanted to be, to use that analogy, making the dishes again and really kind of owning the whole thing. And yes, being responsible for the restaurant and being responsible for payroll and all that stuff. But um, I felt like I was staging or like, kind of just observing
Oh yeah,
of my
yeah.
career in terms of like, what does a good leader look like, right? What does a good design leader look like? I crossed paths with some of the best design leaders in the world, and I was just kind of like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? And how do I run teams versus how do they run teams? How does that work for them, or how does that work for me? Or and I've gotten to know a lot of the design leaders in the community as well, and we have these conversations about what does design leadership look like these days, um, and for me, it really is like there's a couple different types of design leaders who really want to lean in on like subservience to PM, or people who really want to build connections to engineering, or people who really want to go deep on craft, and people who really want to focus on strategy. And I'm kind of I've always been that person who, like you said, is curious about everything. And so for me, my journey has been kind of let me go investigate all the different aspects of leadership and design leadership. And now I've come out with kind of a unique point of view, in my opinion, on the way to do things, the people to tap into when I know that I'm not the best at something, and being able to recognize that in myself and be able to have the people I can pull on to help me out with that. So it felt like I was I had learned what I need, or I had gained the perspective that I needed to see. I saw the entire landscape, and now I was ready to do something in my own way and open my own small little hot dog stand or whatever this is going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of the impetus behind, my new chapter.
Are you able to share what that thing is yet? I mean, you're setting up a business entity. Can you share what the thing is? And you can also just say no.
It's there's a bunch of different ideas. I wouldn't say that it's a single idea. There's a bunch of different disparate ideas, and I'm going to pursue all of them, which is kind of also the probably dumb part of this, which is like I'm going to give myself the freedom to explore hardware, software, and uh, whatever comes my way. And I think that you know, there's the strategy side of my brain, which is like, oh, you need to do market differentiation, you need to do market sizing and like all this other stuff. And there's a craft side of my brain, which is kind of taken over, at least for now, which is like, I want to make something beautiful and I just want to compete. And I think so many businesses and startups and tech industry folks are kind of like over trying to manipulate, business models and incentives and, behavioral change and all these other things. And I think that I used to say this at Frog, which is like, a lot of you guys are too smart for your own good, and that you're
Yeah.
thinking things and you're talking yourself out of things too quickly. And I'm in that mindset right now of like, I just want to compete. So think about the most crowded market you could make that, right? If you're somebody who wants to make something, let's say you're a chef, or let's say you're a musician or something, right? You're somebody who identifies as a creative. It would be an incredibly dumb idea to say, I'm going to open a restaurant, right? Was it 95% of restaurants fail in the first year or something?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I'm kind of going to be done with it and say like, I want to open a restaurant, right? And just compete on pure quality. And, I want to see if I can run that game, because for me, you could be like, oh, I'm going to build a restaurant platform and I'm going to build it's like, okay, great. But also like the restaurant is the thing that I love, and
Mhm.
I want to compete toe to toe on just pure like quality of experience, And
Yeah.
that's kind of where I am right now, which is like, I just want to compete on quality of experience. I don't want to do a bunch of like business model trickery and like, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I want to offer something of value, and I want to see if people will pay for it.
I love that. Yeah, it's that value creation piece. I mean, this is something that I talk about all the time. In fact, I just got off with some startup founders, coming out of Berkeley, and it's like, yep, it's value creation. This is
Yeah.
okay. And where do you point that value creation, and yeah, without saying we're gonna fight, at the low end on price or whatever. Let's touch then on, I mean, this value creation thing. Like, this strikes me. It's not. It's curiosity. It's also very design centric in some ways. Like, let's really craft and find that value and figure out what it is that we're going to compete on when it's value. Why then, and maybe there's the answers in there, but why would you think then designers are so well suited to become founders? Uh,
I think that's a great question, and it's something that's been on my mind for quite some time. I see, I see design founders out there, right? I think the canonical examples are Brian Chesky, Joe
yeah,
at Airbnb. You could look at Kari Saarinen at Linear and some other folks that are out there, and I think a lot of them are doing well, right? For the most part, there are designer founders that are, building their own things, but I think it's for some reason, I don't exactly know why, it's not standard for designers to be founders.
no, no,
And I think that if you think about taking on investment and investor decks and market sizing and, business modeling and value creation and all these things that you have to do, designers have it within them to build all that stuff.
mm,
I don't know if they feel confident in doing that, depends on the designer. I don't know if they feel like they should be able to do that. But that to me is a like agency question. And it's like, do you feel like you can do that? Because I know that you can physically do it. You can plug in some numbers into an Excel spreadsheet and like come out with some market size and, like TAM and SAM and all that stuff. Um, but do you feel like you have permission to do that? And I think that might be where designers feel less, I guess, able to do that or allowed to do that. And for me in my career, like I said, I've straddled so many different disciplines and job titles and industries that I'm kind of like, I don't really care about the specifics of how we get something done. Or I mean, I do care about the specifics of how we get something done. I don't care about the job title. I don't care about the like role. Hopefully you see the entire picture of any business or any organization or team and you understand what it's going to take. Either I'm going to play a small role in getting this to this to this to this to this, which ultimately helps everybody win, or I see the entire thing, I see the entire ship, and I'm going to make my way to the front of the ship, front of the bow, and I'm going to steer, right? And
right,
every job on that ship, from the front of the bow to the captain, all the way down to the person with an oar in their hand, and it's just rowing and rowing and rowing.
yeah,
So, designers I find are often just kind of like, just tell me what to do. Like, give me the PRD, give me the brief, and I'll just make the best possible thing that I can. And I'm just trying to hold on, right? Um, Other times, designers are kind of like, well, engineering, I need to do this, and product is trying to tell me the strategy, and but they're disconnected with the execution, right? And so I think the designers have it within their discipline to see everything. They could see engineering, they could see product management, they could see design, they could see revenue, they could see, legal, they could see marketing, like all these different functions that you need to build a business. Um, you have the ability to see all of that kind of stuff. I think it's the confidence or permission where I see a lot of designers kind of step back from that. And for me, I'm always like, you're a fucking designer. Your job is to make stuff, whether that thing is a widget, whether that's an app, or whether that's a business, like you're designing a business, you're designing a product, you're designing a
right.
team, right? And for me, it's always been the most interesting challenge to design a business and an organization that has a product of value creation at the center. But I always try to see the whole picture and bring on people where I need specialists. But designer founders, I think more than ever, are needed because in the rise of AI and more vibe coding, and I don't know if anybody has seen an engineer try to design a screen in Figma, like craft still matters,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
point of view matters, and intentionality matters. And so I'm here to say that, like, to you and to your readers and listeners, that designers more than ever are at the intersection of the humanities and the technologies, and that's exactly why we are well positioned to build and lead organizations, not just design systems and tokens.
yeah. With great power comes great responsibility, as they say. They, as in the uncle of Peter Parker. Um, uh, what are some first steps then, right? You just mentioned vibe coding, and we've talked about AI agents and so forth. So I don't want to preempt this. I mean, maybe I already am, but what are some of those small steps then that designers can take when they start thinking about becoming a founder and maybe even starting to think of like a founder?
I think it's really important to get the entire picture, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a designer and you're like, I have an idea for a thing, and I don't know if people would want this thing, but I think that I would like this thing to exist, right? Um, there's the how would I get this thing done? There's the how would I tell people about this? There's the what is the plumbing I need to like get this done? So put legal, I'll put finance, I'll put regulatory, I'll put all of that kind of operational things in that bucket, right? There's the how would I get this done, which is the engineering side of things. There's the like, how do I tell people about it, which is the marketing side of things. And those are completely different skill sets, right? And so you as a person may not have all of those skills in your wheelhouse. I know I certainly don't. Um, but do you know somebody who does? Do you know somebody who might know somebody who does? Right? That's all you need. So I'd say like first steps is to write down your idea and then write down what would it take to build this idea? How would I tell people about this idea? And then what is the infrastructure needed to support that idea? Right. And so how would I get this done? That's traditional product design, that's traditional product management, that's traditional engineering. You could collapse all of that into one, how would I get this done? Right.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the constellation of things you need to build a business around an idea, those are the three main buckets in my view, right? Like, how do I get this thing made and how do I tell people about it? And what is the underlying infrastructure to like support the entire organization? So first part of your journey should be focused on the like, what is it? What is the thing that this company is going to be centered around? How do I get that done? Obviously, if you're a designer founder, you should focus on the craft and the actual execution, which means you're going to have to get really deep with the engineer and find somebody who can partner with you. If you're technically minded, you could do it yourself potentially, right? Stitch together analytics tools, stitch together like an architecture, like a web or native architecture and all of that stuff. Like if you're technically inclined, go for it. But if you have a partner to kind of bounce ideas off of strategically or execution wise, I would probably index more on the execution side. So get really deep with the coding tools to really understand kind of the different frameworks that are out there and what it takes to build, a proper production grade product, and then get it out there and see what happens, or get a vibe coded prototype out there and just see what people think and go through that process yourself. And if you're a designer, you hopefully have gone through that process a couple of times where you have an idea, you have a hypothesis, you put it out there and you see what people think, whether that's with a native prototype or with a paper prototype. So like I said, designers have these skills at their disposal. So use that on your own idea.
Yeah.
But then you have that map of like, what would I need to actually build this business? And then you can go back to that map. So, okay, that's the how, that's kind of running. Now the how do I tell people about it? That also needs to be running at the same time. And then there's the infrastructure stuff, which also needs to be running at the same time. Which of these do I want to focus on? Right. And every
Right.
day can be different. But if you have that map, that constellation of everything I need to build a business, it helps you figure out where to focus, right? And probably 90% of the time, maybe your first couple of years, will be focused on that. How do I get this done?
Mhm.
And then you can start to say like, okay, I found product market fit. I should start to tell people about it. And you can start to bring in other people to help you with that. But I find that having a map of the world, so to speak, is really helpful in orienting yourself. Say that like, let me not lose sight of everything I need to take into account.
Yeah.
If it's, oh, that's a throwaway idea that some engineer had about a feature that we could add. Oh, but if I look at this map, that actually might be a funny like go to market thing, or like let's just do a memeable feature that would be a fun marketing gimmick or something like that. That has value. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
and so it gives you perspective on ideas and how they live and die, and what you should be focused on in terms of attention and cataloging and
Yeah.
how you keep track of things. But I don't know. I would say that my best piece of advice would be to have a map of the world that you want to build and constantly calibrate your time and attention on what's the most important thing to focus on, right?
Yeah. I think that's profound. And it also goes back to, that agency as a designer to decide, okay, what are the things that I'm focusing on and what are the things that I'm going to do versus hand off to someone else or something else. Um, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what are some of those tools? You mentioned vibe coding, for instance. What are some of those tools that you might be using or thinking about using or playing with even that you think are game changers then for design founders?
I think if you're technically inclined, understanding at the very least the landscape of tools that engineers are using is pretty important, right? Because understanding their tool chain will help you understand where you can collaborate with them the most. If you're at the least bit technical, learn some prototyping tool, learn a little bit of how Swift UI is structured, learn a little bit Cursor works, learn a little bit about how Windsurf works, if not to code, if only to understand how these things work in an engineer's tool chain, so that you can understand how an engineer might work with these things, so you could collaborate better. There's so many tools that are popping up right now. It's hard to know which one to invest time and energy into. A lot of them are using the same underlying models, so it's kind of like, how do I work with a foundational model that's maybe kind of getting consolidated as a space. But understanding the problems that these things are trying to solve really deeply will help you be a better founder on the engineering side. On the product management side, on the strategy side, there's plenty of tools out there. I'm not going to name anything. I think, the good Google Doc trumps any kind of like enterprise tool you're going to have to pay a subscription for. That requires clear and structured thinking if you know how to do that. And a lot of times I don't know how to do that. And so some of these tools are purpose built for that specific moment. So there's a lot of things like Linear that can help you keep track of your roadmap and things like that. And I would say that, like, don't focus on using the latest and greatest. Focus on what am I trying to accomplish and what are the tools that can solve this right now, right? When I started this journey, in this latest chapter, I spent probably a week investigating all the different tools out there, and I went super deep in downloading them and installing them, and like, what is this? And reading the documentation, and how do I do this? And how do I make it a rounded rectangle in this new environment or whatever? And it was kind of like I was wasting a lot of time on things that weren't moving me forward because I was installing all these things and trying all these different things, but at the surface level, right? So do an audit of the landscape of tools that are out there and figure out which one is going to solve the problem that you have. Because again, zooming out to that constellation, you don't have a ton of time to spend on setting up your production chain, right? Because you got other things to worry about. So figure out the one that's either tried and true or the one that's most promising and automated because you're not technical, and move on, right? And keep going and focusing on what you want to focus on. So I think Windsurf is amazing. Cursor is amazing. Some of the stuff that Figma is working on is going to be really exciting. I think there's a lot of design systems things with AI that are going to be really interesting in the coming years. But I'm not focused on using the latest and greatest or the whiz bang things. I'm really focusing on what's the minimum amount I need to get the result that I want.
Got it. Just have a couple more questions, and hopefully you're okay with that.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. You talked about product market fit. So here you are, you're a founder, right? You're going to try a bunch of different things. But we're very similar in that approach. I'm just a maker, a creator. I love making things. And for me, I love making businesses, and it's okay when they fail because like, oh, great. Now I can focus on something else. But maybe it's not a but, and when you think about designers, designer founders, how is that approach towards product market fit maybe different than a typical, engineering-led, tech-led startup, or is it?
I think the opportunity for designer founders is you have the opportunity to define and design what success looks like. In an organization, somebody has already decided this is the KPI that matters. This is the metric that matters. This is the thing that matters, right? Maybe that's craft. Maybe that's engagement. Maybe that's new user signups or whatever, right? But somebody has already decided that. For you as a designer, you can decide, I want high craft to be the number one thing that we go for as a success metric, right? Even if my users are in the single digits, right? You could call that a win, right? If I started a business today, and I said, craft is going to be the number one thing. I want to make something the most beautiful something that ever existed, right? If by my judgment, because I'm the founder, I make something that's the most beautiful whatever that I've ever seen, I will have won, right? If you're trying to scale that, right, you need to be able to marry that with data. But if you say my criteria for being successful is I can make 1 out of 10 people that I show this to say, holy shit, that's beautiful, then that's success. Then set that as a metric, say that that's your North Star metric, and build everything around that. So that's the opportunity with designer founders is you can decide what your priorities are as an organization before it becomes a real organization, right? Because before you're 100 and 500, 1,000 people, right? So you're deciding the core values of your organization, which is incredibly valuable and really impactful if it does then take off, right? Because if your intuition is right and you're doing the all design processes, you will find product market fit and you'll be able to scale from there. But that's really the most important lever that you have as a design founder is being able to design what success looks like.
Yeah, that's huge. And design, from an engineering perspective, again, I was speaking with some folks earlier today. They're all engineers. They just graduated. They start the startup, and where they launched into it was, we have all this code, and finally it's working right. And so their criteria are so different. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but they're so different because now they have this working code, and the lip syncing's working, and all this other cool stuff is working. And I'm, sort of like, okay, it's working. And so, what does that mean? Yeah, and here you're saying, yeah, okay, as designers, we can do that. We can design all that stuff up front, and we can design what success actually looks like, probably beyond just some working code, which is hard to do on its own. And yeah, there's someone else that we're probably doing it for.
Exactly. I mean, that's good for at Uber, just as an aside, like they were incentivized to just run as fast as possible. So
Yeah.
we had a million different business units, all with their own tech stacks that were like, don't worry about talking to anybody else. Just go as fast as you can for your little business.
Right.
So you had, I don't know how many different tech stacks, but they were running as fast as possible and they were innovating as fast as possible. When it came time to talk to, this service to this service, it was incredibly difficult. So the incentives are different per organization, and it's on you as the founder to kind of decide what's most important. Is it speed or is it quality or is it something else?
Yeah, love it. All right, just a couple quick sort of flash questions. Maybe this isn't a quick one. Have your kids picked up on your creative maker spark? And if so, what do you tell them if they decide to follow in your footsteps?
It's funny. We just ended a school year, and one of my daughter's teachers said, she's going to be a leader someday. I was like, oh no, I don't know what that means. Is she bossing her little brother around, or is she bullying other kids or something? And it's nothing that serious, but they said that she has leadership potential because she feels really strongly about things and she's open to feedback, but she comes in with a point of view. And then when we're home, we have all these toys and tools and things for them to play with. So they picked on the idea that like, this is how this thing works. And there's a story that Steve Jobs tells again from his childhood where he had a workbench in his dad's garage. That was his space. And he learned really early that all the things that we surround ourselves with were just made by people. And there's a very simple way in how they work. And so I'm trying to teach that to my kids too, which is that like that, Nintendo Switch that you have, that was just made by people. And what do you think about the color, the shape of the controls? Like, does it feel good or what, right? Like, how would you change it? Like, move a 3D printer, we can go change the shape of the grip if you wanted to, right? It's just a couple screws and one screw it and we'll figure that out. And so I'm trying to show them that all of these things are malleable and the world is malleable. And so I think my daughter's picking up on that quite a bit. And she's learning how to like orchestrate her friends and like on the side. On the other side of it, my son, who's the younger one, is just having a lot of fun with all the different systems and things that are out there. And so I'm trying to teach him how to build a system of like, he's learning Minecraft and the world in the system of Minecraft. And did you know that when you add these two things together, it becomes the other thing? And I said, why do you think that is? What if I add this thing to this thing? What should that make? And trying to get him to think about the systems behind things. And so we're trying to build it and talk about it in my house. My wife, tries to limit the amount that we talk about design. I do love the idea of tools and ideas around at our fingertips wherever we go.
Love that. What do you do, and maybe what's your go-to ritual when you're stuck creatively or technically or otherwise?
I think for me, it's step away.
Yeah.
If I'm stuck, like if I'm stuck on a design problem, if I'm stuck on a strategy problem, if I'm stuck on anything, go take a walk, go do something completely else, right? Play music, go play the guitar, go play the drums, go listen to your favorite artist, go take a drive, whatever it needs to be. But like, I find that like the brain is such a interesting organ, if it were in that, like, you think of the way neural networks work with AI, right? They're modeled off the human brain with neurons and the different pathways and things. Um, and your job as a human with a human brain is to ingest all of this information and to process it and to come out the other side of it with
Yeah.
point of view. Sometimes your brain just needs to process stuff, right? And so if
Yeah.
you're stuck, it means there's no output yet, right? So give it a second and go be inspired by something else, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been stuck and I'll go listen to some song, will trigger something in me that will unlock this other thing that I was stuck on a week ago. And I'll go do that. I'll go solve that problem. And the next day, the thing I was working on today is now unstuck,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that having that map of everything is really helpful for me because I know that I can go work on something else if I'm stuck in a particular area. And that will hopefully unstate the other part of my brain that's currently blocked.
Great. All right. I've got one last question, and it's now we're on the final like premiere round, which is you're talking about humans and how you unstick yourself, but also, then there's the other part of that, which is ideation and sort of figuring out what the thing is. Sketchbook or ChatGPT?
I think it's both, actually. I actually have
Yeah.
a notebook here
Uh-huh.
and my notebook here with notes and ideas, and ChatGPT to kind of help me think things through, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually use a bunch of different models inside ChatGPT, not just like 4.0. I'll use like, the O2 or O3 or whatever.
Mhm.
But I also use Claude and some of these other ones just to try to get different perspective because, I know a little bit about how these underlying models work. But also, the whole point of this exercise with myself is to like put my own stamp out there. So I know that AI is going to give me kind of what I'm asking for exactly, right? It's not going to really challenge me in the way that I want to be challenged. And so I will write stuff down for myself and come back to it an hour later and see how dumb it is, right?
Yeah.
Challenge myself. And so I actually use both. And I use one to kind of organize my thinking and then another to kind of be free and loose with my thinking and to try to put as many provocations for myself out there as I can.
Yeah. Makes sense. I do exactly the same thing. All right, James, I've kept you long enough. I truly appreciate you being here. Is there any last thing you want to tell people, maybe where they find you, what you're working on? Maybe you need help. Anything you want to, lead us out with?
Sure. You can find me on all the socials. I'm usually at JSong. If you want to follow me there, I'm usually on Threads more than I would like. But I think that for designers out there that are listening, I really want to encourage you to think about what it is that you think about something, right? And that know that you have these skills already within you to fully own and do that thing in its entirety, right? Now, of course, you're going to need help, but I think that confidence or agency problem, I really think that's a fallacy out there. And if anybody thinks that they can't do it, I'm here to dispel that notion because I know what it takes to be a good designer these days, and in that is all the skills to be a founder. So why, um, why go through all of that pain when you already know what the thing should be, right? And you already know the way that you should find out what this thing should be. So just go do it.
Yeah.
And everybody has the skills within them to go do that. So I encourage you all to pursue it. And if I can be helpful to anybody, please reach out. I'm here to be an ear for anybody that's going on their own journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and look forward to speaking with you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Justin.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Design Shift. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a quick rating or review. It really helps more designers like you find the show, and it helps me make better shows. And if you're not already subscribed to our awesome newsletter, head over to designshift.me. See you next time.